All right, let's dive right into one of the most controversial ideas in Robert Greene's entire book, The 48 Laws of Power. We're talking about law number 2. And this one, well, it challenges a really core human instinct, trusting our friends. I know, it sounds ruthless, but if you stick with me, you'll see it uncovers a pretty uncomfortable truth about how power actually works. So here it is, the core of the law, and wow, it hits hard. Be wary of friends. Green is literally arguing that they can be a greater threat to you than your enemies. Now, you're probably thinking, how can that be? Well, the logic is that a former enemy has everything to prove, right? And that makes their loyalty, in a weird way, more reliable than loyalty that's just based on feelings. It is an absolutely shocking claim, and that's exactly why we need to unpack it. And look, that's the natural reaction, right? Of course it is. Friendship is supposed to be all about trust and loyalty. So how on earth can it become a liability when power gets involved? That's the huge conflict at the heart of this law, and that's what we're going to get into. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First up, we're going to look at a really tragic story of betrayal. It's a perfect example of what not to do. Then we'll flip the script and see how some of the smartest leaders in history have actually used their enemies to their advantage. And finally, we'll get into the nitty-gritty, the psychology behind why this law works. We're talking envy, gratitude, and power. So let's set the stage with our first case study, Emperor Michael III. Picture this guy. He's young, he's a bit inexperienced, and he does what pretty much any of us would probably do in that situation. He turns to his best friend, a guy named Basilius. He pulls him up from nothing, gives him everything, thinking, hey, this is my friend. This is the safest choice I can make. But of course, by mixing that deep personal friendship with the incredibly high stakes of running an empire, Michael makes a huge mistake. He commits what Robert Greene calls a transgression of the law. And this one mistake, it's going to cost him his life. Let's watch how this whole thing just unravels. And just look at this timeline. It shows you how fast everything goes south. I mean, Basilius starts out as a simple, stable groom. Michael just showers him with gifts, power, education, treats him like his own brother. But here's the crazy part. Instead of gratitude, all that generosity just plants the seeds of a really dangerous ambition. Before you know it, Basilius is plotting to get rid of Michael's allies, he gets himself made co-emperor, and then he has the very man who gave him literally everything murdered in his sleep. And this right here illustrates the absolute tragedy at the heart of this law. See, Michael wasn't just betrayed by some random advisor. He was betrayed by someone he loved, someone he saw as a brother. He made a huge assumption that friendship automatically means loyalty, and he paid the ultimate price for that mistake. So what's the real lesson here? It's this. Michael's fatal flaw was not understanding the psychology of giving. You'd think showering someone with favors would create undying loyalty, right? But it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes those favors feel like heavy burden, a constant nagging reminder that you're somehow inferior. So Michael didn't create a loyal friend. No, he created an ambitious monster who felt crushed by all that charity. Okay, so if relying on friends can be that dangerous, what's the flip side? What makes a former enemy so useful? This brings us to what Greene calls the observance of the law, where we see smart leaders turn their rivals into some of their greatest assets. All right, let's take a look at Emperor Sung of China. He inherits this throne in a time where military coups are like the norm, and his most powerful generals, they're his so-called friends, but he's not naive. He knows that every single one of them is ambitious enough to take his job. His biggest threat is coming from his own inner circle. So what Sung does next is just genius. Check this out. He throws a huge banquet, invites all his top generals. And in the middle of this party, he gets real with them. He basically confesses his fears, saying something like, I'm so worried one of you will be forced by your men to overthrow me. Then he offers them a deal they can't refuse, a golden parachute. He gives them estates, riches, a life of luxury. All they have to do is peacefully give up their power. And just like that, he turns a pack of dangerous wolves into happy, harmless nobles by giving them an honorable exit. And you know, this idea isn't just for ancient China. A much more familiar name, Abraham Lincoln, he totally got this. What did he do? He created his team of rivals, bringing his biggest political opponents right into his cabinet. He took all their ambition and pointed it toward a common goal. He didn't destroy his enemies, he absorbed them. Let's take another great example, Napoleon and his foreign minister Talleyrand. This guy had actively worked against Napoleon, yet Napoleon hired him anyway. Why would he do that? Well, let's look at this comparison because it makes it super clear. A former enemy, they're predictable. Their motivation, usually self-interest, is transparent. They have everything to prove, so they'll work their tail off to show you they're loyal. A friend, on the other hand? Their motivations are all tangled up in messy emotions. They kind of expect you to let things slide, and all the while, that little green monster of envy can be bubbling just under the surface. And you know what? This doesn't just apply to individuals. It works for entire groups, even nations. Think about Mao Zedong. He actually used the Japanese invasion of China as a strategic tool. This massive external enemy gave him a training ground for his army, and it made his political cause crystal clear to everyone. Having a well-defined enemy, it sharpens your focus like nothing else. Okay, we've seen the stories, we've seen the examples. Now let's really dig into the psychology of law too. When you boil it all down, it comes down to two incredibly powerful and often misunderstood emotions: envy and gratitude. You see, when Greene talks about ingratitude, he's not just talking about someone forgetting to say thank you. It goes way deeper than that. Think about it. When you give someone a massive gift or a huge opportunity, you're thinking, great, I've just earned their loyalty. But from their side, they often feel the crushing weight of that obligation. It's a constant reminder that they needed your help to get where they are. And over time, that feeling can curdle and turn into real resentment. Just think about how this plays out in the modern workplace, right? If you hire a friend, all the professional lines get blurry. You might hesitate to give them tough, honest feedback because you don't want to hurt their feelings, and they might start expecting special treatment. But if you hire a former rival, the relationship is crystal clear. It's based on mutual interest and competence. They know they have to perform, and their loyalty isn't assumed, it's proven every day through their actions. So these are the psychological traps you can fall into with friends in a power dynamic. There's that unspoken envy. Your success can feel like a direct criticism of them. There's the gratitude burden we just talked about, which leads to resentment. The boundaries get all messed up, making it almost impossible to be a good boss. And honestly, friends will often soften the truth to protect your feelings, which is the last thing you need. Plus, that old saying, familiarity breeds contempt, it's true. They've seen you at your worst, so they're less wowed by your authority. All of this just chips away at your power. So let's be clear. The point here isn't to ditch all your friends, not at all. The key is to keep friends for friendship, but to separate that from the world of work and power. When power is on the line, you need to be able to judge people objectively, based on who is the most skilled and competent to help you. Making a choice based on an emotional attachment, well, that's just a really dangerous gamble. But like with all of Robert Greene's laws, this isn't a black and white rule. It's not absolute. There are actually times, specific situations, where the opposite might be true. And this is what Greene calls the reversal. So that leads to the obvious question. Must you avoid working with friends entirely? Is there ever a time when it's actually a smart move to put a friend in a position of power? Well, the answer is yes. But it's risky, and it comes at a very, very high price. Okay, there are a couple of, let's be honest, pretty cynical reasons to use a friend. For one, as a scapegoat. If a plan goes wrong and you need someone to take the fall, sacrificing a trusted friend is a shocking and powerful move precisely because no one will see it coming. Or maybe you need some dirty work done. Their personal affection for you might make them willing to take risks that no one else would. But, and this is a huge but, here's the catch. If you use a friend this way, you will lose that friend forever. You are basically weaponizing your friendship, and the damage from that is always permanent. I think this quote from the philosopher Baltasar Gracian just sums up Law 2 perfectly. A wise man profits more from his enemies than a fool from his friends. See, a fool builds their power on the shaky ground of emotion and friendship. But a wise person, they understand the predictable, transparent motives of an enemy and learn how to use that to their advantage. An enemy keeps you on your toes. A friend can make you dangerously comfortable. And that brings us right back to you with a final, pretty provocative question. Take a hard look at your own inner circle, the people you really count on. Are you counting on them because they're your friends, because it's comfortable? Or are you counting on them because they are genuinely the most skilled, most competent people for the job and your interests are aligned? The answer to that question, well, it says a whole lot about your own relationship with power.